So what we were looking at yesterday are different proofs to the argument that Rav Sharaga makes that whenever there's a profit to be obtained through a shaliach doing something on behalf of his mishaleach, so we were looking at this strange case yesterday where one person invests 100, another person invests 200. So then whatever profit they make is divided between the two of them. And Rav Hamnuna says, "Afilu shor lacharisha va'omed l'tvicha haschar la'emtza." We didn't understand that whole argument, so we'll take a look quickly at the Gemara in Ksuvas Daf Tzadi Gimel Amid Aleph. The Gemara in Ksuvas Tzadi Gimel Amid Aleph states as follows. Just give us a second to bring up the. Go. Okay. So the Gemara is talking about if different women are married to the same man and he dies, we prorate their ketubas, so each one collects a certain percentage. So it says if there were 200 dinars in the estate, the one whose marriage contract was for 100 dinars takes 50, while those who contracts were for 200 and 300 dinars take 3 dinars of gold each, which are the equivalent of 75 silver dinars. If there were 300 dinars in the estate, the one whose marriage contract was for 100 dinars takes 50 dinars. The one whose contract was for 200 takes 100 dinars, and the one whose contract was for 300 dinars takes 6 dinars of gold, the equivalent of 150 silver dinars. So basically oh, sorry, I don't know why it's not on the screen. Okay, so let me just share that. Okay. Similarly, 3 individuals who deposited money into a purse, i.e., invested different amounts of money into a joint business venture. If they incurred a loss or earned a profit and now choose to dissolve the partnership, they divide the assets in this manner based upon the amount that each of them initially invested in the partnership. That's what the Mishnah says, different from what we learned yesterday, different from the way Rav Sharaga quotes it. But the Gemara says, let's take a look at the Gemara. Okay, Tanya, Zu Mishnah's Rabbi Nassan. It is taught in a brisa that the Mishnah is the teaching of Rabbi Natan, but Rabbi Yehuda says, I do not agree with Rabbi Natan's statement with regard to these women. Rather, they divide the estate equally, v'chein shlosha she'itilu, and similarly, 3 individuals who deposited money into a purse, invested different amounts in a joint business venture, divide the assets in a similar manner. Shmuel said in a case of 2 individuals who deposited money into a purse, where one put in 100 dinars and the other one put in 200 dinars, the earnings are divided equally. So that's different from our Mishnah. So Rava says that Shmuel's statement stands to reason in a case where they bought an ox for plowing and it was used for plowing, and now they wish to divide the earnings from the work of the ox. Since each part of the ox is necessary in order to plow, each partner's contribution is equally necessary. So the argument goes like this. You invested 200 into one ox. I invested 100 into that same ox. both of our investments are equally necessary in order for the ox to do its work. Because unless we have that amount of money to make sure the ox is working, the ox can't work. And since it's one unit of money earning, that there's the object that is earning money is one solid unitary being, we split the profits equally. However, in a case where they purchased an ox for plowing, but it was used for slaughter and they wish to divide their income from the sale of the meat, this partner takes his portion according to his monetary investment, and that partner takes his portion according to his monetary investment. So if we end up slaughtering the ox, then you'll take 2/3 of it and I'll take 1/3, because that's fair as far as the investment went. And Rav Hamnuna said, even in a case where they purchase an ox for plowing and use it for slaughter, the earnings are divided equally and we split the sale of the meat 50-50, which doesn't seem to be logical. So how do we understand that argument? Okay, so v'chein pasku harif v'harash sham v'harambam v'chein ifsak b'shulchan aruch shecholkin shava b'shava v'hizber hashita mekubetzes de mazla de beitrei adif v'lachein yachloku shava b'shava. The Ramban quoted in the Shita Mekubetzes wants to argue that even if they slaughtered the animal, you still split the sale of the animal 50-50, because each person's mazel contributed to the ability for them to be able to fetch the high price for the sale of the meat, which again doesn't, after they've taken their money back, right? So each one takes 50-50 of the profit only. That's right. That is correct. Okay. Now, but still, people were still unhappy, right, with this argument. But they prorate the profits. Yeah, that's binasa. However, apparently that's not how Rav Shiraga brings. That's not how we paskin for some reason. Now, let's continue. Let's see where this takes us. V'uvda hava be'echad shekana aliyat shishi b'sach meya shkalim uba acher v'kana mimenu es ha'aliyah be'elef shekel v'nechlaku haposkim lemi harevach. He says, I don't know what this means, aliyat shishi. I don't. This must be a term, aliyat shishi, where he bought it, some kind of dwelling space. He bought it for 100 shekels. Another person bought it from him for 1,000 shekels. And the machlokus is who gets the profit. Dihine b'sefer olat tamid dan ba'adam shekana aliyah l'meshech shana b'mechir mesuyam u'mishalem al kach kol chodesh. There's the Sefer Olat Tamid adjudicates in the following case. A person purchases, really it's a rental of an apartment or an attic for a specific price, and he pays it out over the course of each month the rent is due. Beniftar be'emtza shana, but he signed the contract for a year. The guy passed away in the middle of the year. Chayavim hayorshim lahamshich l'shalem et demei ha'aliyah ad sof ota shana kamo shehitchayev avihem bekesav shahorish lahem. The heirs are obligated to pay out the full year contract of the rent because that was what was contracted. O sheyimkeru et ha'aliyot la'acherim, or to sublet to other people. V'hazoche yishalem lebeis hakneses. And whoever purchases the contract from them will pay the shul. Again, this must be, I think what it's talking about is a shul has an attic and they would rent it out for every Friday night for people to sleep in the attic. So this guy gets it, and then he contracts for it for a year contract of leasing or renting, and then he dies. The heirs have to pay it out, or they can sublet it to a third party. V'im hazoche kana oso yoser bizol mimashi ischayev avihem Ayorshim yashlimu et ha'hefresh lebeit hakneset. But if the subletter got it for less money because the heirs couldn't get the same price that their father paid for the rental, they have to make up the difference. The imachru yoter biyoker mimashakana avihem. Arevech shayach lebeit hakneset kevin she'ein osim asakim urvachim al cheshbon beit hakneset ad kan devarav. If, however, they're able to sublet it for more than what their father was renting it for, they also have to let that go to the shul. Why? Because they don't have the legal right to profit off of the shul's property. Now that varies from contract to contract, I would imagine. In this situation, the argument being is that the shul perhaps is, you're not allowed to make money off of the shul. That could be unique to a synagogue. Could be because it's a place for doing mitzvahs. It's not a place for making money. Could be there's a religious aspect to it. It's not really clear. A non-profit organization. Ulefi hatam hazeh magia ha'elef shekel lebeit hakneset ki ein la'asot revachim al cheshbono. Ulam. So therefore, the shul would, let's say, if a person bought it for 100, but was able to sublet it for 1,000, so that goes to the shul. Ulam b'shiari knesses hagdola kasav shaharevach magia liyorshim. However, the Shiari Knesses Hagdola disagrees, and he writes that the profit can go to the heirs. Ulefi zeh gam kan harevach kulo magia lezocha harishon ba'aliyah, v'yesh ratzu ledamot din zeh lehecha sheosifu matana l'shliach b'yachloko, im kein gam kan yachloko. There are those who say that no, when profit is made by a person who's renting, so he's making money off of someone else's property, and therefore it's more analogous to what we're talking about here, which is that partners, like one person is the principal, the other person is the agent. It's not his property. He's making money off of somebody else's property, just like a shaliach who goes to buy merchandise and then is given a gift. They have to split it. So too, if a person sublets an apartment, he's able to make money off of the sublease, it should be that both the landlord and the tenant should split the difference in the profit. That's the argument, he says, that some people wish to make. He says, ume'inyan le'inyan. So he doesn't really paskin on that, but he just says that logic would dictate that there should be a splitting. Now, I think a lot of it will have to do with the contract. In other words, there are many times when you lease a property and the contract explicitly states you do not have a right to sublease the property. You have to get permission from the landlord. Or it could say but here we're talking about a situation where there is no contract that excludes a sublease situation. And the question, therefore, is to whom go the profits? And normally, I think in secular law, correct me if I'm wrong, Marvin, but if a person is permitted to sublease his property, he doesn't have to disclose even how much he's even getting for the sublease of the property to the landlord, if he's got consent. But there are those who wish to argue from a halachic standpoint that he has to share the profits of the sublease with the landlord because he's, again, making money off of an enterprise where the principal is other than himself. Let's go to another similar shaila in halacha. I have a piece of non-kosher meat. It gets mixed in with 2 pieces of kosher meat that belong to my friend. Shahabasar hatreif niya kosher kedin yavesh biyavesh chad betrei batal umutter. The Shulchan Aruch paskins that if 2 dry pieces of meat, we're not dealing with a stew here, but you have like 3 chunks of meat, they get mixed together. You say bittul berov. You say that, and therefore it's not because of there's no flavor here that is being detected because you're not eating the pieces of meat together, but we say that they are batal. Let's assume that the price of the treif meat is the same as the price of the kosher meat. And the question is, how do they divide the profit if they want to sell the 3 chunks of meat? The mistaber shezeh yikach demei hatreif, uverevach yachloku kamo kol hagdugmos hanal. So it would seem that halachically, let's say each person, when he purchased the meat, each piece of meat is $10. So you have 3 pieces of meat that are now worth $30, but they're able to, because of fluctuations in the market, they're able to sell the 3 pieces of meat for $50. So the halacha would dictate that for my piece of treif meat, I get 10. Your 2 pieces of kosher meat, you get 20. And then we'll split between the 2 of us the extra $20. So you get 10 and I get 10. That's how you would say the halacha would be based on what we've learned above. Ve'im hayabasar sha'asar bahana lo yitin lo berevach klum kevin she'en lo kan din mamon. If, however, the meat is asar bahana, then I guess lo yitin lo berevach klum. The guy whose piece of meat you're not allowed to benefit from, he would not get anything. Kevin she'en lo kan din mamon, because he's not allowed to profit from this meat. And I'm not sure why he's bringing us this example. I guess maybe if it was a piece of meat that had been cooked in milk, you're not allowed to get any hana from it, so he would not get any money for his piece of meat. V'yesh li'isbonein b'din shehivenu la'el, shebal hapara v'havlad cholkim b'neihem b'nafcha kidiisa b'bavakama, madu amrinan yachloku v'lo amrinan zanen v'zeh lo chaser. So we learned before in a previous case, if a cow gets pregnant and one person owns the fetus and the other person owns the cow, and they sell the cow for a higher price because it has wider girth, so we said that they split the profit of what is the additional value of the cow based on its added girth. So the question is, why do they split the profit in that case? Remember, we saw that 2 days ago. It's true that the fetus caused the added girth of the cow. Why don't we say that the owner of the fetus gets nothing? He's not losing anything through the sale of the cow. He's still going to get his calf. So why don't we say that all the profit should go to the owner of the cow, since he's zen nehenev zelo chaser. The owner of the cow is profiting, and the owner of the fetus is not losing anything. Don't we normally say that if you can contribute to my benefit without you losing anything, you're not entitled to it? It's called zen nehenev zelo chaser. This guy benefits and you're not losing anything. The Teretz HaMarcheshes, the Marcheshes answers, the Hagdaras Inyan Zenena V'Zelo Chaser, Shayach Rak B'Daber Sheke'es Eino Be'en. Aval B'Daber Shu Be'en Lo Arminan Zenena V'Zelo Chaser, Ki Zeh Dome L'Misha Rotze Logor B'Chaser Chaver D'Yochol Balabais L'Akev Ba'ado L'Chatchil. And the answer is that you only say Zenena V'Zelo Chaser after the fact. That if I benefited and you didn't lose any money through it, then I don't have to pay you. But if now I want to benefit from something that belongs to you, and I approach you and say, let me use something that belongs to you and I'll benefit from it, I have to pay you for it. I'm not entitled to say, just because you're not losing anything, I can just take your thing and benefit from it. And the same thing with the cow. I'm benefiting from the added girth of the cow because your fetus is inside my cow. Therefore, I have to compensate you for it if I plan to sell it now. Lo shaykh lomar zen enev zelo chaser. And therefore, we don't apply the principle of zen enev zelo chaser in a situation where I propose to make a profit off of it now. So that ends the tshuva, and I'm scratching my head because this whole last part of the tshuva seems to be just a jumble of different ideas that were thrown into the everything plus the kitchen sink was thrown into this discussion. But at the end of the day, what Rav Sharaga wanted to communicate to us was that in a situation where there are two parties, one has contributed the value, and the other one contributes the service, right? And sometimes it could be right that there are other variations on that theme, but one is the principal, the other one is the agent. Then and they are able to profit. They split that profit because each one has contributed something to the added value that is gained through that enterprise. And even though sometimes you could argue that one has contributed more than the other, but when all other things are equal, and there's no way to evaluate whose contribution is greater because the contributions are different, so then they split the profit between the two of them. Okay.
But this is clear when you have a cow or 1 unit. So if you have 3 pieces of meat, there are 3 independent pieces of meat. I understand that clearly the case is not kosher, you are not allowed to profit, so that only the one at kosher, the 2 pieces of kosher, they get all the profit. But if you have 3 kosher pieces of meat,
and one person owns the one piece, the other person owns the two. So normally you would think that you would prorate the profits, okay? But apparently in certain circumstances, I guess if you're selling it as one unit, so then you don't prorate it because maybe the guy would have you'd have to make the argument that he would only have purchased it as a group of 3. And since therefore we both need each other equally in order to make that sale happen, then we get to split the profits. Correct. So they're reliant on each other. You're allowed to profit off of treif meat. There's nothing wrong with profiting off of treif meat. Well, but the treif meat it becomes kosher because it's batel. It becomes nullified because we don't know which one is which. If you can still identify the non-kosher piece of meat, so then it's not batel, and you have to discard it or sell it to a Gentile. Okay. This is a great question, whether the halacha requires you to eat the 3 pieces of meat separately. I believe there is what to discuss about that, but I don't recall the halacha right now. But that's a very good question. Okay. The next shaila, which we'll just ask the question today. So again, I'm very perplexed by this last essay. I'm still scratching my head, like it was not structured in the way that I would have expected. Okay. Are you allowed to change the terms of a deal after you've already finalized the terms? After you've already agreed, right? Can the seller change the terms of the deal after he's already agreed to sell? Or shall we say, under what conditions are you allowed to change the terms of the deal? So here's the case. That Reuven promised to sell Shimon his car. The sikmu b'neihem al mechir. They arrived at a price. Avolo asu shum kinyan, but there was no transaction. Ka'et Reuven mitcharet v'lo rotzeh limkor et mechonito. Now Reuven has remorse, and he doesn't want to sell his cars. Seller's remorse. Ha'imuter lo lachzor bo O sharon et ha'iska kisagura. Is he allowed to back out of the deal, or do we view the deal as final? Now, this was one of the very first things that we learned when we studied Imre Yaakov. If you recall, this is going back years. When we first studied the very beginning of Imre Yaakov, we learned about a principle called mechusar amana, the person acting in bad faith. And that means that even before any kinyan has been made, a person is obligated, according to the Torah, to stand by his word. And if you don't stand by your word, then you are what is called a mechusar amana, which means that if you and therefore, halachically, if a person does withdraw from a deal that he verbally agreed to, he is doing something wrong according to halacha, but it's not an actionable wrong, which means that if I refuse to sell you my car in this situation, even though I verbally agreed to, you cannot sue me in Beis Din because there was no kinyan made. But in Shamayim, if the person were to ask the Shaila Rebbe, am I allowed to back out? The answer is no. You gave your word, you have to do it. Now, but at the same time, if you fail to sell the car and you don't fulfill your word, this person has no legal recourse against you because there was no kinyan. So it's really, it's not a, I guess the way to distinguish the halachic principle is normally when there's a legal dispute between two parties, the legal dispute falls to the two of them to resolve halachically. Here, it's not a question of a legal issue that has to be resolved between the two of them. There's clearly from the standpoint of the relation, the contract between Reuven and Shimon, Reuven is within his rights to back out of that contract based on their relationship. But vis-a-vis his relationship to Hashem, he's committing an evil. He's committing a wrong because he's not standing by his word. Okay, that's what we learned all the way back at the very beginning when we studied Imre Yaakov. Let's see how Rav Sharaga will answer this Amir Tzashem tomorrow. Okay.